James is a bright red engine. He likes to think of himself as the most splendid engine on the island of Sodor and boasts about it. James is also a mixed traffic engine, so he pulls coaches and trucks. Although he prefers to pull passengers than goods, James still knows that doing the work he doesn't like as much means he's being a really useful engine. So he doesn't mind, especially if some goods are important to work with. James likes doing important jobs as well. One day, James was at Crovan's Gate talking to Scar, Loey and Rheneas. "I'm glad to be a red engine," he puffed. "I have no problem with you two not looking as red as me. In fact, your colours might look as splendid as mine." Scar, Loey and Rheneas were pleased to hear this. Just then, the Fat Controller arrived. He had an important job for James. "The road and track line before Kelsthorpe Road Station are going under some maintenance," he said. "I would like you to help by bringing materials, starting tomorrow." Yes, sir," replied James. "You will be working with George the Steamroller to mend them both," finished the Fat Controller. "George?" wished James. He had never met George before. Scar, Loey and Rheneas had. "George is a rude steamroller," explained Scar, Loey. "He always calls out, 'Railways are no good! Turn them into roads!'" added Rheneas. "His job is to mend roads and help to flatten foundations for new roads. But his favourite thing to do is rip up old railway lines and have them turned into roads." James was shocked when he heard this. "We've heard from the mainland that many railway lines were torn up in the past years, perhaps by some other steamrollers," sighed Scar, Loey. "That won't happen on this island though, as long as we all keep the lines running smoothly in service." "All the same, you should be careful with George and his ways," warned Rheneas. James let off steam, feeling nerve-wracking as he puffed away. The next day, James arrived at the maintenance spot with a tar wagon and some ballast. Then he saw a grumpy green steamroller sitting by the workmen. It was George. "Hello," chuffed James. "You're George, I take it." George looked up at James. "That's right. And who are you?" "I'm James. I heard from other engines about you." "Oh, have you now?" "Yes. You like to tear up rails and have them replaced by roads, apparently." "Ha ha! Yes, and it's a thumping good life as well, mate. You rail machines are out of date. People like to travel wherever they want to these days, thanks to the road. And we flatten useless tin kettles like you at the scrapyard." "Tin kettle!" shouted James. "Come along, James," interrupted his driver. "We have work to do." You stay out of my way when I'm working, snapped James. George scoffed. Later, James had shunted the truck of rails and sleepers into a siding. George rolled across the track behind him, fetching the trailer full of digging supplies. When James reversed, he bumped straight into George. "Oi, watch it!" growled George. "I'm rolling here! Out of my way!" Then, James had to help to bring the ballast and tar to every hole in the road that had to be filled in. As he puffed along, George distracted him. "Is that the fastest you can go?" he mocked. "No wonder railways are no good." "Be quiet!" hissed James angrily. "Oh!" he exclaimed. His trucks had bumped off the tracks, and he had buffered into them hard. "Another reason railways are no good," went on George. "People must find it dreadful riding on bumpy rails. They're useless and worn out." James was furious and let off steam. "Grrr!" he growled loudly. He had had enough of George and his ways. Soon, the mess had been cleared up, and James prepared to set off to Crovan's Gate sheds for the night. Then he heard his driver talking to him. "This piece of coal seems a bit dusty," he said. "We better make sure that you have clean coal on you. We don't want you breaking down or you can't work." When James heard this, an idea flew into his funnel. Then he puffed away. When he arrived at Crovan's Gate, he looked around the yard. It was full of coal trucks that needed organising. As he puffed towards the shed, he suddenly bumped into a truck in front of him. It was loaded with coal that hadn't been touched for a long time. It was very dusty. "Perfect," thought James. "I'll show that steamroller." James chuckled and puffed away. The next morning, George had been fired up and was ready for work. But he didn't feel the same today. James arrived feeling bright and cheerful, or so he was acting. "Morning, George," he said. "Humph," mumbled George. "Listen, I know we didn't get along yesterday, but I think we should work together if we really want to be useful and get this job done." "Go play with coaches. I haven't got time for Mr. Nice Engines." As George began to move, everything ran smoothly at first. But then there was trouble. "Oh!" he cried. What's happening?" George's controls had broken, and he chuffed very fast around the site. The men ran to safety just as George turned around and sped towards James. Oh no. "Stop, George! Stop!" George's driver had jumped clear. James had been pushed off the track. He had broken down too, but not as much as George. Soon, Edward arrived with the breakdown train. The foreman explained what happened. "It was my fault, sir," said James. "I caused George to break down." "How?" asked the Fat Controller. "I replaced his clean coal with dusty coal I found at Crovan's Gate last night. It was a trick, but I know it got me into trouble as well. I'm sorry, sir." "You made me break down?" shouted George. "Why, you insignificant—" "Silence!" demanded the Fat Controller. James, I am not happy with this trick you have done. That's twice you've done it, and you've once again caused confusion and delay. I will have to send for another engine and steamroller to do this job now. Even though you have owned up to your mistake, and I am pleased with you for that. As Edward took James to the works, George mumbled to himself, "If those engines are going to give me trouble, I'll show them what giving trouble is all about." At the works, James was still feeling bad about what he had done. Edward spoke kindly to him. "Don't worry about it now, James. Next time, you must learn to not let George get to you. Ignore him and tell the Fat Controller if he gives you bother." "I suppose you're right," replied James. "But I have a bad feeling that accident could make things worse now." A few weeks later, George waited in the yard for Percy to take him to a new workplace. "You're just worn-out wheels on worn-out rails. You need rocks for your roads, and we're helping you. I need to flatten little engines in the scrapyards. Railways are no good. Turn them into roads. Rulers are rubbish, so good riddance."